Rabbi Shimon saved the entire world from a fire-breathing dragon. And if this sounds like science fiction, then you should just learn more Zohar. And you'll see some wild stuff. We have to mention, because it was mentioned yesterday, that when we mention ideas like this, that we talked yesterday about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Torah sage, saving the entire world because of a fire, 30 fire-bolted, breathing fire dragon as big as a mountain of blackness was threatening to destroy the world, and he had a dialogue and told him to get out of here. I'm going to chain you down to the mountains of darkness, that if you don't go back to God and tell him that Rabbi Shimon is here, then it's going to be bad for you. So it's important to know, anytime we mention things like this, we have to realize what is literal and what is allegorical. Does it mean that Rabbi Shimon actually saw this dragon and there was 30 streams of fire coming out of his mouth? Or does it mean that there's a lesson and it's more allegorical? So the answer is, some of the agadatos are literal and some of them are allegorical. But they all have a message. They all have a meaning. The Rambam explains that if a person thinks that none of the medrash, none of these teachings are literal, then he's a fool. Excuse me. If he thinks that they're all real, we talk about birds, the Bar Yochani bird. There's a bird that shows up in the Gemara that is so big, the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Hey, that one time this bird dropped an egg, and the contents of the egg cracked, and it destroyed 300 cedar trees and submerged 60 cities under the contents of the egg. That must have been a big egg to drown 60 cities worth of humans. Hashem Yirachem. So you might say, that is, wow, I better start going online and, who's got sightings of this bird? You probably have the Loch Ness Monster Chevra also, and the Bigfoot Chevra. So I got to find this bird. So the answer is, it's allegorical. It's allegorical. So a person who says all the things that it says are real, they have to be real, I'm sure. So you're a bit foolish. It's a foolish way to look at things. But if a person says none of them are literal, you know what we call him? A heretic. Some of them are real, some of them are allegorical.
Conspiracy theorists.
Well, yeah, we'll call them conspiracy theorists. The answer is that some of them are real and some of them are not. But what's common is that every single thing in the Torah has a lesson to teach us. So the lesson that we mentioned yesterday is the power of the tzaddik, the power of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that no matter what amount of darkness and what amount of destruction that's being brought to the world, which also means whatever amount of darkness is happening to me in my life, whatever amount of challenge I'm going through in my life, as bad as it looks, and it looked very bad for Rabbi Shimon yesterday, it looked bad for humanity. Whatever is happening, when you think all hope is lost, and everything is done, and I'm giving up, and there's no hope, and we're done, finito, there's a light inside of every one of us called the light of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the light of the tzaddik, the light of the righteous one, that when that light shines and you tap into that light, it pushes away all the darkness. Because we all know that a little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. Isn't that an amazing thing, Reuven? You would have thought that you have a very dark room. How would you dispel all the darkness? Eitan, how would you dispel? I would have thought you would need an equal amount of light, right?
Right.
I would have thought, logically,
You don't need equal amounts.
even though I have this much dark, just if I was a Martian coming from outer space, and I would just to make a calculation, this much dark, I probably need equal amount, this much space of dark.
It's relative to the space here.
I would have thought I need this much, same amount of light. No. You have a whole room of dark, you light one candle, the whole room. The darkness is it is cast away. And moreover, the concept that when you light the light, you don't even need to actively remove any darkness. It's not like, hey, let me get this light. Let me start, okay, got the light. Let me just like shovel out some darkness to make room for the light. By virtue of just lighting the candle, as soon as the light is illuminated, the darkness flees on its own. Which means as soon as any of us inside of ourselves tune into the light of our neshama, all the darkness will just flee without effort. That's the light of Chassidus, is tuning into that light that already exists inside of every single one of us, which is called the light of the tzaddik, which is called the light of Yesod. And that's what we've been working on this whole week, because this week is getting in touch with that point. And we also mentioned that the Yesod is what holds a building up. Yesod in Hebrew means a foundation. You ever built a building? No? You know how they build buildings? More or less?
More or less.
You dig a pit, they just start putting a building up?
No, they build the under foundation.
The foundations. And without a foundation, you could have a very, very beautiful building, but the building falls. The foundation is not the building and it's not the ground. It's what allows the building and the ground to coexist together, that there's a building now extant, existing on the ground. That's called the Yesod. So the Yesod inside of every one of us is the thing that allows all my dreams and aspirations to actually exist. But if something goes off with the Yesod, with the foundation, my whole building, the whole me, the koyim shlem of me is done. So we mentioned also the last couple of days, what is that thing? That Yesod is deeply connected to healthy pleasure. Healthy pleasure, and specifically pleasure of connection. The pleasure of connecting deeply to something, and of course pleasure is always, in its highest forms, associated with intimacy in relations, marital relations. We also have a rule that anytime that you have something that is on the highest side of pleasure, or the highest side of good, on the dark side, it will be the most destructive. So, on the side of pleasure of, let's say, wine. Wine is very pleasurable, especially the Hungarian yain, the good stuff. We have an ancient tradition that Hungarian wine is very, very dear to us. Hungarian wine is also a code word for very deep pleasure. Wine is also the same numerical value. We have a pen here? Yeah? Everything in numerical values is very significant. So how do you spell wine in Hebrew? Yud, and nun. So what's the numerical value of a yud? 10. 10. And what's a nun? 50. So equals 70. How do you say secret in Hebrew? Sanach, Vav, Dalet. So, Sanach is 60, 6, 4. So, when you drink wine, Nichnas Yain Yoitza Soy, the secrets come out. Wine, yeah, right? The wine, everybody knows that. You have a few cups of wine together. So wine has this deep secret inside of it. And wine has this deep pleasure. And that's why we use wine at our holiest ceremonies. Reuven, do you know when we have a cup of wine? By a wedding. We stand under the wedding canopy with a cup of wine. My wife taught me something very beautiful that she learned in one of her shiurim recently, is that every time that you see wine, except Havdalah, every time you see wine, and even Havdalah, I think you could answer Havdalah also. Every time you see wine, there's always a status change of going from mundane into holy. There's some transition of going from a lower level of holiness, transition, so much so that we would call it mundane, transitioning into a holy realm. So for example, a couple who is not yet married, we say that, you might have a very beautiful relationship, but at the end of the day, you're just boyfriend and girlfriend. Until you tie the knot, the Torah is very into tying the knot. The world seems to reject that nowadays. I was talking to one of the guys recently, and we were just talking about marriage in general. The idea of having family. He said, Rebbe, the world, he said, on campus, do you know how many people told me if you get married, you're done? Finished, worst decision. I said, really? How many people? He said, everybody. They tell me it's the worst decision you can ever make. It's so in the culture now. Don't get married. So, Baruch Hashem, we reject that because we live with the true message of God that told us, get married. So the way we look at it is very nice. You have a beautiful relationship, your boyfriend and girlfriend. But once you get married, your status as two human beings. They have a cute book with a title, From Me to We. I like that one. From me to we. There's no longer me. We become a we. You transition from being me, you, two different things, to now it's just we. There's a famous story of Rabbi Aryeh Levine. Anybody heard of Rabbi Aryeh Levine? Yeah? So it was known, he was a great, great righteous person here that lived in Yerushalayim. He was renowned for showing love and compassion to every single person that he met, each one according to where they were at. And he spent a lot of time in prisons, visiting prisoners who had made bad decisions in their life and messed stuff up. But he wanted them to still feel that, as they were going through rehabilitation, that there were people there that were there to help them. And so he would go and blow the shofar for them on Rosh Hashanah and get them a Sefer Torah and bring them kosher food and matzah on Pesach. If stuff went wrong, we believe in the power of human change and that people can rehabilitate, which is one of the reasons why this is a side topic, but one of the rehabilitation techniques that the Torah has is that if a person has a horrible thing happen, where there's a manslaughter case, where it was not intentional, he can flee to a city of refuge and take shelter in that city. There are only select cities of refuge, 6. Do you know who lives in those cities?
The Levites.
The Levites. You know what the Levites are all about?
Learning Torah.
Just learning Torah. So he shows up at this city, maybe thinking, okay, I guess, what's going to happen here? Maybe, meet some, go to the bar, hang out. All of a sudden he's met by just a city of rabbis. They're like, okay, so we know what happened. Let's learn some Bava Metzia. Let's learn some Gemara together. And he goes into full rehabilitation mode. Okay, back to Aryeh Levine. Aryeh Levine was renowned also for his beautiful relationship with his wife. And there was one time when his wife, her foot was injured. So they went to the doctor together, and he said to the doctor, doctor, our foot hurts. Yeah, one of our 4 feet, it hurts. Now, he didn't mean it like, funny. He meant it, my wife and I have become so much one that it's our foot. Our foot hurts. It's not, my wife's foot hurts. I'm going to be over here. Let me know when this is all done with. I'm getting on a business call. No, our foot hurts us. So the transition of going from non-married to married is that there's a holy unification. There's wine. What happens when you go from the 6 days of the week into Shabbos? Kiddush. You're going from the mundane into the holy. You do a bris milah. Your child has an orla, which is the sitra achra mamish, the nachash akadmoni mamish, amalek mamish. And when you remove that and you reveal the crown, you reveal that God is the one that runs the world, you go and you make that on a cup of wine. That's right. And there's different shemus with your fingers and shakai and different things. Some fancy stuff where you're doing things. And you're bringing godly energy down. And of course, there's a cup of wine. So wine is always this symbol of something holy coming out in some secret, the greatest secret being that we can take the mundane world and elevate it to a status of holiness. Reuven.
Is it only wine or is it all alcohols?
So great question. Wine is the substance that we use. In halacha, there's a discussion, can you use an important drink, meaning a drink that you would serve dignitaries? Would that also have the status that you could, what's called Chamer Medina? Some people say, what does the Queen of England serve? So they say maybe tea? No. What about freshly squeezed orange juice? If an important person came to your house, like a real dignitary, what would you serve them? So it used to be that when kings and knights and shining armor showed up, you would pour them a cup of wine. That was considered a royal beverage. So it's royal because intrinsically, like we're talking about, wine has this intrinsic secret contained within it. And secondly, it was the substance that in the Garden of Eden, one of the trees that we discussed that Adam ate from was the grapevine. And because so much destruction came out of the world from Adam eating from that tree, we have the ability to fix using the same tree. That being said, if you're ever in a place where you can't obtain wine, it could be that you can use another beverage. Some discuss maybe whiskey. But always the most preferred beverage is wine, and the best quality wine that you can afford. Of course, kosher.
Grape juice if you can't.
If you can't stomach wine, then yeah, you can use grape juice.
Get a cheap wine next to an expensive bottle of whiskey, which is more preferable.
Look at these. You're such a Talmudic scholar. What do you say, rabbis? Cheap wine or Macallan 50?
Cheap one in the cottage and then whiskey the rest of the meal.
Both. I like that. So, yes, there is such a thing that wine has the secret. Whiskey doesn't have that same secret inside of it, that it fixes the sin of the garden and it transitions you from, it could transition, but not with all of the tikkunim of yayin. That being said, I like the suggestion on the table that you would have the wine for Kiddush and then have the Macallan 50 for the meal.
For the oneg.
For the oneg. Because Shabbos is very, very important to enjoy. But I had to make a disclaimer. Yidden, we are not into drinking. What I mean by drinking, we're not into heavy drinking. We're not into this idea of, it's who's got the bottle for tonight. That we don't talk like that. We don't think like that. We enjoy this much as an accompaniment to the pleasures of Shabbos. But make no mistake, don't mix up. The pleasures of Shabbos is called downing bottles of whiskey. That's just the pleasures of the Sitra Achra. That's the false pleasures. That's the pleasures of the dark side, turning a guy into an alcoholic. We accompany our meal with Macallan 50, if that's where your price point is at. We accompany our meal with very nice beverages and micro brews, but not that that's the feature of the meal. Yeah, so far so good. So anytime that you have something on the side of a lot of holiness and potential, what is the opposite side? Of course, alcoholism is one of the most destructive lifestyles that could be even described.
Might kill you to quit.
Yeah, it literally destruction itself. So we have the very same substance that offers you the biggest pleasure, the biggest gain, the biggest opportunity, the holiest day of the year. You know what we do? The holiest day of the year is Purim. And the Reuven's like, what? They never told me that growing up? They didn't tell me that in Sunday school? That's the holiest day of the year, is Purim. It's a very holy day. And it's a day that we actually drink.
But at that point, the point is to get very drunk, right?
Well, we'll talk about it more on Purim time. The point is to get besume, to get spicy. The point is to get into God revelation. The point is not to make this like some frat party, oh, I guess, the whole world's got their frat, so at least the rabbis gave us one day, like throw a dog a bone, give us one day of just getting wasted. That is the antithesis of Purim. Purim is a buildup of understanding what the secret of wine really is, and then for one day, totally immersing into it. Going, we would say, higher than our intellect. If you'll notice, there's one thing about Torah observant Yidden, we're very into using our brains. You guys ever notice that? You hang around yeshivas, everyone is like very intellectual. It's rational arguments, rational points of looking at the world, a logical sequence, talking things out, appreciating two sides of how to see something, debating. It's a very logical, mind-oriented life because we understand the mind can see things in an objective way. And all of a sudden, one day, we just throw our minds out the window? The answer is no. The Yid understands that as far as you can take your mind in understanding the truth of reality, there's always going to be one part of it that you're not going to fully understand, logically. Because how could a finite being understand an infinite being? So there has to be we could go 99% of the way, logical, rational. But then there's that one small point. That's not called blind faith, by the way. Blind faith is, I have no evidence. Here's 99% of the way of evidence. And in that extra 1%, we say we have a solution for that also. It's called Purim. It's called, on that day, you go beyond your mind into the totally experiential, and you also understand God beyond the mind. It's very, very important to know that. It's logical to have a day called Purim. Now, by the way, 99% of the days are not Purim. But then is it that you're totally using your mind. And using your mind, you get to that place where you realize it's so clear and obvious that this truth is the fabric of reality, but I also know my limitations as being a finite being, trying to grab onto the infinite. So I have one day where I say, I concede to the limits of my finite thought process, and I allow the last little bit to just be experienced beyond the mind. Yesod is the same thing. Yesod is the pleasures of intimacy. On the side of goodness, there's nothing more pleasurable. There's nothing more bonding than two people being together, building, connecting as one. But sadly, on the other side, there's no bigger destruction. There's no bigger separation of two people if that thing in Yesod, if that area goes wrong. Therefore, this week of Yesod is very much about getting the Yesod clear, making it strong, giving it a strong, solid footing that my entire building can be built on that Yesod. Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow we're going to do a little bit more about Reb Shimon, finish the inyan of Yesod, and get ready as we're moving towards Malchus, when the entire structure is built. As we build up to Kabbalah Torah, we should be Zoich and Mamish Omen. Have a wonderful day, Rabbi Isai. Kol Tuv.